Welcome into another Mainly Hoops podcast episode where today we're going to discuss some of our best future bets for the NCAA tournament. There's a lot of value out there, in particular, some national championship futures, some Final Four futures, and in particular, some Sweet 16 futures that we really like, or there's some really good value out there on them. That's too good to pass up. I know one we mentioned a little bit in our Texas Tech preview, and that's where we're going to start. The first one, Texas Tech to win the national championship at plus 3,500. Cody, why don't you dive in and explain this one a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when I first saw it, I was just kind of looking through futures when the bracket came out, and they were sitting still at 3,500. I believe they were at 3,500 before the bracket was released. But then I kind of noticed, I kind of like the path that they have here. And we talked about, I think St. John's is a vulnerable 2 seed. So I do think there's a lot of room for this team to go deep. So at 3,500 for a team that I think is easily a top 10 team in the country and probably like fringe top 5. I mean, I think that's a fair thing to say. I think they're better than most of these 2 seeds. I think they're a better team than Michigan State. I think they're a better team than St. John's. And I think they're borderline right there with Alabama and Tennessee. So I think they're being priced probably a little bit too high. They're being priced like the worst 3 seed, like 4 seed range. I don't see that at all. I think they're a top 5 or 6 team in the entire country. And this team has the shooting ability to go on a super deep run. And they're getting healthy now as well. Like McMillan and Williams seem like they're ready to go. So I like the path that they have. And then just looking at the rest of the West region, like Florida's really, really good. And they've been on a really good run, and they look like arguably the best team in the country, but there are some landmines in their stretch. Like play UConn in the second round. They're a tough team to prepare for, and I think they could lose that second round game. I'm not going to say they're going to, but I think there's a real chance that Tech might not even have to run into the 1 seed by the time they get to the Elite Eight, and because I think Maryland could beat them in the Sweet 16 as well. So I think even though we're calling this region the region of death, or whatever you want to call it, like I think it could be a pretty favorable path, because I think there's a path where St. John's ends up losing before they would even have to play them in the Sweet 16. Like losing to Kansas or Arkansas isn't out of the realm of possibility. So at plus 3,500 with, I think, a pretty fortunate path to potentially get to the Elite Eight, Final Four, 3,500, you're going to have options. I don't think they have like the top tier upside to win a national championship, but I think they can easily get to the Final Four, and then you'll have plenty of like either cash out options, hedge options, middle chances in that range. So I think at this number, I think you're getting really good value.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Texas Tech, right, they're a different team than they typically are because they have the ability to shoot over the top this year. They have a wide range of shooting. They actually can score the ball efficiently on the offensive end, which has not been the case for them in years past. Typically have just been a hard-nosed defensive team that kind of labors their way on the offensive end to wins. But this is a different type of Texas Tech team. So I really like this bet. With that, I also like Texas Tech's value to get to the Final Four. If you're not as confident in that national championship bet, Final Four odds at plus 550. Now, like you said, right, like Florida's playing like one of the best teams in the country. But I think that the value and the path for Texas Tech to come out of that bottom part of the West region and at least get to the Elite Eight, and then basically just have one game to play to get to the Final Four. I like that path a lot. And even if they made it to the Elite Eight and you had that bet, you'd have some options to maybe place a bet there to hedge or something like that. Depending on how that game goes, you could maybe middle it. So I definitely like that one as well. But Texas Tech definitely looking like a team that could do some damage this March.
Yeah, if you don't want to take as much of a long shot, you have to win a few extra games to have those options, those cash out options or hedge options. I don't prefer a cash out option that you're never going to get a good option at any book. And typically you want to middle something or just try to hedge. Getting plus 550 for what they have to win. I mean, they got to win 4 games or 3 games to get to the Elite Eight, right? And then at that point, they might not even have to see the 1 seed. They could be favored in that spot. Because I do think Maryland absolutely has legs to get to the Elite Eight, Final Four. So yeah, I really like the path, and a lot of most of these bets that I'm going to discuss are very path driven, and that's what a lot of this is in the NCAA tournament. Is like, did you catch a break with the teams you're about to play? And if you did, there's probably some value. And then like down the road, is there a chance you're going to be playing a double digit seed later? Like, I think obviously, yeah, at 3,500, I was a bit shocked to see that number after the bracket was released.
Yeah, another team in that same region, I think, where there's some value is Maryland at plus 4,500. For me, this is simply a play on the number, right? I think they're live against Florida if they play Florida in the Sweet 16. I think Maryland has a pretty good path to get to the Sweet 16. Play the winner of Maryland and of Memphis and Colorado State, which I think is a good matchup for them. And especially with Memphis's injuries. And Maryland does a lot of things well that they haven't really done in years past. They take care of the ball. They're very efficient offensively. They have really good guards, which bodes well for NCAA tournament play. And they have obviously Queen and Julian Reese down low. Obviously, like we've talked about, depth is a bit of a question mark, but I think this group is good enough and they're efficient enough and they can really shoot the three where, in the tournament, the things you need, good guard play and, elite shooting, not turning the ball over. These are really important things in the tournament, and they have those things. So at plus 4,500, I think that number is just too good to pass up.
For sure. And I wouldn't even mind if somebody took both of them. You get both of those teams in the Elite Eight. You can just sit there and watch and have fun, and then you'll have plenty of options in the Final Four. So if you think Maryland's live to potentially beat Florida, I think it's something that you could take a shot on. And if you think St. John's is vulnerable, like I do, I think you could take a shot on both. They're both in opposite sides of the region. So it's not like you're kind of having these teams run into each other in the Sweet 16. Like, obviously, that's not really a smart thing to do right when you see a bracket. So, yeah, I do like that. Maryland, they have no weaknesses, as we've talked about. Like, I guess besides, like, at times they really don't shoot well inside the arc for whatever reason, even though they have some dominant interior presences in Queen and Reese. And they just have some games where they shoot like 15 of 38 inside the arc. It's just for whatever reason. I think they settle for mid-range shots. They settle for floaters. But overall, I think that's more nitpicking, but because typically they do score inside the arc efficiently. So yeah, I don't really think this team has any weaknesses, and they can play up against anybody in the country.
Yeah, definitely. Now we also have some Sweet 16 bets that we like. There's a lot of value out there on the board. Cody, what are some of the ones you like?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to a team that I don't think I've discussed on here before. It's the UC San Diego Tritons. But no, I've discussed this team ad nauseum since the bracket was released. And I've even talked about them well before they were even determined to be in the field. But I really want to attack this little quadrant here. I think Michigan and Texas A&M are extremely vulnerable in their first round matchups. So I actually think you could potentially bet UC San Diego and Yale to get to the Sweet 16. And then I think you'll have plenty of options. If one team gets there, or even if both teams get there, you'll have a ton of options. I think both teams are absolutely live. I bet both of these teams against the spread as underdogs. UC San Diego at +3, Yale at +7.5. If you've already bet those, like, maybe refrain, or it's like just make it a smaller bet on this team to make the Sweet 16. You don't want to have too much exposure out there. So yeah, I prefer UC San Diego because I think they're way more live against Michigan. And then I think they can also beat Texas A&M with their ability to turn them over. Like, A&M is pretty weak with the ball, just like Michigan is. And I would worry about the glass a little bit for UC San Diego, but I do think they're a super well-balanced team that can take care of the ball and turn over A&M. And those are the the two areas, and they shoot the ball extremely well. So in that second round matchup, I think there are a lot of avenues to success for them. And then if they're going to play Yale in the second round, they're going to be favored by, I believe, 3.5 or 4 would be the projected spread at this point. So yeah, I think UCSD at plus 390. And then if you like the bigger number on Yale at plus 600 and you prefer them in an upset pick over A&M, that's probably the side to go with. But I think this is a quadrant of the bracket that you can really attack and you can really find some value.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. As we've talked about a bunch with Michigan in particular, right? They're an extremely vulnerable team that turns the ball over basically at will. So that's definitely a team I look to attack. And if Yale can pull off another upset, I think they've pulled one off, two or three times in the last 10 years. That's a double-digit seed. So, if they can pull that off, we might be looking at the UC San Diego Sweet 16. So the value there, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think they get there. Like, I think they're borderline. I think they're a better team than Michigan. I mean, I think a lot of people think that's crazy. I mean, Michigan just won the Big Ten championship. I get it. But they've been vulnerable all season long. They've been fortunate pretty much all season long, at least the back half of the Big Ten schedule. They've been extremely lucky. They didn't win a game by more than 3 points for like a month and a half. It was pretty crazy to watch. And I just think they're due to lose a game pretty big. And this is a perfect matchup. And then at plus 390, you're going to have options in that second round game. They'll still be a dog. They'll be a slightly bigger dog if they end up getting A&M, but I really like the matchup for Yale. So I think there's a real chance they end up drawing Yale in that second round matchup.
Yeah. Now I'm going to stay in the South region for my next one. Another Sweet 16 bet. I like Ole Miss here to get to the Sweet 16 at plus 280. I just think the value is kind of ludicrous as a 6 seed, especially in that little quadrant. I know UNC is playing really well right now, but I still think they're vulnerable. Their 3-point shooting has obviously been off the charts recently, but I think Ole Miss can bother them a little bit. I think if they can get by this one, I'd like the Ole Miss guards. Padula has shown the ability to hit clutch shots, not only this year at Ole Miss, but also in his past at Virginia Tech. He's been to the tournament before. I trust Chris Beard. Been a great coach. Took a team to a national championship game in Texas Tech. They're not going to just roll over against UNC tomorrow or Friday. So I think I don't really know what to expect, but I like their spot if they can get by this one against UNC. I know UNC is just, like I said, running really hot right now. And so maybe it's just you just ran into the wrong team. But at plus 280, if they win this one, Iowa State, they play next probably. Iowa State or Lipscomb. Iowa State, we've talked about Keyshawn Gilbert out for the rest of the season. So that's a big loss for them. They're not the same team without him, especially on the defensive end. So I just think Ole Miss is being a little bit undervalued here, which is my reason for liking this bet at plus 280, right? Like I'm not going to throw a big wager down on this, but I think if you want to just put like $10 on it, even $5, I think it's a worthwhile bet because I think the value is there.
Yeah, I think it's more of like a contrarian bet, and I do think the value's gotten a little bit ridiculous on it. The numbers got a little bit high. Like Carolina's favored in that round 1 matchup, and I think they're playing well enough to deserve to be favored in that matchup. Just the way they played over the last month is pretty impressive. I personally have Carolina plus 600 to get to the Sweet 16. I got that before the first 4 games. I thought they had a real chance to beat San Diego State, and I thought there were matchup advantages against Ole Miss. But yeah, from a pure number perspective, I do like Ole Miss there, and I think a lot of it depends on what do you think about Iowa State, and do you think there's is there a bigger chance than the books are implying that Lipscomb has a chance to potentially take down Iowa State? And on paper, I think they profile pretty well. I mean, pretty good on the defensive glass. albeit it's the A-Sun, and not a lot of teams are all that physical in that league. But Lipscomb shoots the ball really well, and they take care of the ball. So that's two areas that you could potentially beat Iowa State. Iowa State loves to turn teams over, but if you have a lot of if you have 4 or 5 ball handlers on the floor at a time, it's really hard to turn a team over like that, even if you are one of the best turnover defenses in the entire country. And this is always that rim denial defense that is susceptible to giving up weak side catch and shoot opportunities. So if they get hot, there's a real chance. And then if Ole Miss wins, there's obviously serious value at that point. They'd probably be favored by, I believe it'd be 9 or 10. It'd be in that range. So I think you'd have a ton of options. You'd have a middle chance. You'd have just a straight up hedge chance on Lipscomb. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good number. I do think UNC is probably a tad overvalued at this point. They have a sample size of 20 to 25 games that they aren't that great of a shooting team. They're just on kind of an insane run right now. Jalen Withers is making every shot that he takes. They started the game against San Diego State, I believe it was 6 of 6 or 7 of 7 from 3. They just made every shot and just didn't turn back in that game. They looked like a top 15 team in the country, but maybe the public perception is driving that number up a little bit. And at 1.5, like a pure power rating wouldn't have UNC favored, but just the way they're playing lately has them as a 1.5 point favorite. And it kind of just depends on how you view that team as well.
Yeah. Another Sweet 16 bet I like also is on the other side of the bracket. VCU sitting there at plus 340. We've talked about it in our game preview for them against BYU. I think it's a good matchup for them. I think they're going to be able to turn BYU over. And they also have an offense that they haven't traditionally had in the past. They have the ability to get it hot from behind the arc. So I like them to get by that game, as we've talked about a bunch already. But if they're able to get by that one, you got the winner of Wisconsin and Montana waiting. Now, I think Wisconsin's a little bit tougher. Their size could be a problem. But I do think the value at plus 340 on this VCU team, who is just super physical on the perimeter defensively, can turn you over at an elite rate. I think it's worth it at plus 340, especially if for some reason Wisconsin were to go down to Montana, if Malik Moore and Money Williams were to get hot and Wisconsin went down. I think then obviously, like you just said, same thing on the other side of the bracket, you'd have some options there, right? VCU as the 11 seed, they would be favored in that game. I don't know what the line would be at, but they'd be favored against Montana. So I think this is just purely a play on the number. I think plus 340 for a VCU team who obviously knows how to win games. They've been winning all year, and they have what it takes defensively, and they're a much better offense than they've been in years past. So I would not be at all surprised if they made it to the second weekend.
Yeah, and I think the best reason to take this would be because they match up extremely well against both teams. BYU and Wisconsin are very similar offenses. They both sort of rely on their catch and shoot ability and their 3-point shooting ability in general. VCU is one of the best 3-point defenses in the entire country. They deny catch and shoot opportunities, and they guard every single one that's taken, and they defend it super well. I think they're top 10 in effective field goal percentage in the entire country. Actually, I think they might be number 1. I don't have the exact number up right now, but they have a ton of length across the board. So even if they have to, I know their problem is defending inside, they're a little bit thin in there. So even if they have to send 2 guys down to the post, they have enough length to get out to shooters, even when they're forced into rotation. So I still think they have a ton of legs, especially to beat BYU. I think the pressure is really going to bother BYU. They're going to pick them up 94 feet pretty much the entire game. And that may become an issue because the game's being played in altitude in Denver, and BYU is going to have more of their home crowd there. I don't really worry about that too much in a tournament setting. There's depth on this roster too. They have enough guard depth to be okay there. So yeah, I like how they match up with both BYU and Wisconsin. I don't think they get Montana. I'm not super high on the Big
Yeah.
Sky in general. I don't really think they can play up. But the fact that they match up really well against both teams, and I think you're getting a decent number on VCU just because they haven't really played up against power conference competition this year, but that was 4 months ago, 3, 4 months ago, where they kind of struggled in the Charleston Classic. They've proven that they're a much better team since then. So, yeah, I think this team has the potential to be a top 20 team right now. We're just kind of undervaluing them because they played in like a weaker A10 conference all year.
Yeah, definitely. And then my last bet I have is a Sweet 16 parlay. I think Clemson Auburn Sweet 16 parlay. This is sitting at plus 228. I think pretty good value there at plus 228. I really like Clemson's path. They're going to play McNeese, who like just found out their coach is leaving today, which is just wild because they're playing the game tomorrow. But we'll talk about that probably in the postseason a little bit. But just a wild phenomenon there. And then in their quadrant also, they've got Purdue and High Point. And, I think they match up very well with both teams. I think like Clemson's size, their efficient offense, their ability to take care of the ball, their veteran leadership. What we've praised about Clemson, especially as the year's gone on and they've improved. I think this Clemson team has a super, super good path to make it to the Sweet 16. And then to pair that with Auburn, who, they're not losing in the first round to Alabama State, right? And then they'll get the winner of Louisville and Creighton, which, Louisville, of course, we thought should have been a better seed, but they weren't. We expect Louisville to win that game. So, Louisville can +, cause a little bit of trouble, but I don't think that's where Auburn's going to slip up. So I think Auburn Clemson at plus 228. I think that's pretty dang good odds.
Yeah, I think even if you want to just play Clemson on its own at plus 140, I think you could get that at. I think that's fair as well. And it obviously depends on what you think of that other matchup. Like we've talked about, we really like the matchup for Clemson against McNeese. Like they deny the rim, they can force them to be jump shooters, and they have real advantages on the offensive end. They can shoot over the top and they can get all over the glass against a smaller McNeese team. So we definitely like that matchup. And the High Point Purdue game is a high variance matchup, at least. Like even if you think Purdue is going to win that game, like we've talked about it, their defense has real holes, and High Point doesn't really have a ton of offensive weaknesses. Like you can't leave anybody open on this team, and they can shoot over the top of Purdue and score at the rim. Like Purdue has the worst rim defense in the country all season by 2%, I think it was. They give up like 71% at the rim this season, which is just an absurd number. But if you think High Point can at least keep up on the offensive end and they can jump on them early and get a little bit hot from three, they have a real chance to win that game. And then you're getting a really good number on Clemson, obviously, who matches up a lot better against High Point. And even if they get Purdue in the second round, like I think that game would be probably a pick, maybe Clemson favored by 1. But as I know, the public perception on Purdue isn't all that great right now, but that matchup really does suck for them. So yeah, I think you could play it on its own at 140, or you could use it's a little bit of like a sweetener on Auburn, who I don't know, they're not vulnerable, I don't think, but the second round matchup could be a little bit dicey with Louisville playing in Rep Arena. So I think it would be just kind of preference. If you really like Auburn and you think there's no chance that they lose in that second round game, or think they aren't, or Louisville's not all that scary, like sure, add it on. But yeah, you can get plus 228, which is a good number. But I think even playing 140 is fine. I actually consider just playing it by itself.
Yeah, no, for sure. That definitely makes sense. So that's all I have for my bets. Cody, anything else that you had in terms of Sweet 16 or other futures?
Yeah, I actually have a little parlay as well. I went Arizona and Tennessee at plus 113. I just really like this quadrant that Arizona got. I mean, Akron in the first round, we talked about that matchup. Akron plays a little bit too fast. They're a little bit too offense heavy, and they don't have enough defense to stop Arizona. I think Arizona can kind of name their number on the amount of points they want to put up. They can get all over the glass. They can, like I said, they can score in transition. The guard play edge is probably with them as well, and I think those guards are in really good spots to make shots at a decent clip. They're probably going to get left open a decent amount. Akron's defense is just, it's not really there, and they struggle to defend teams in the MAC, albeit, and they still went 17-1. I think that kind of shows how good their offense is. But playing against caliber of defense and athletic defense like Arizona, I think can definitely slow them down. And just the fact that Arizona is going to play at the pace that they like, I don't think there's really a path to an upset there. And then I think they match up really well against both Oregon and Liberty. Like Oregon, I just think is overvalued in general. And for Liberty, I just think they're too small. I know they can slow down Arizona, and that's kind of the matchup I always look for is like if you're gonna force Arizona to operate in the half court for the entire game. I don't really love their chances, but I think they can smoke Liberty on the glass. They're a really small team. Their center or their front court stands 6'8", 6'7". Like it's just, I don't think it's going to be a match for Vesar and Carter Bryant and Tobe Awaka. Like I just think they can get on the glass as much as they want to in that game. So I really like that little quadrant for them. They're minus 180 on their own, which I actually considered playing it on its own, even though like minus 180 doesn't seem like a good number on the surface. I think that's something that you could definitely play on your own. And then Tennessee, I don't think there's really much of a chance for UCLA or Utah State to hang around in the second round. Utah State's defense has really been regressing, and we kind of both feel the same way about UCLA's offense. It's just not all that great, and he's not willing to play the guys that we really want to see him play on the floor, mostly Adai Mara. Like he really creates all of the offensive upside for that team, and when he's not playing, it just kind of falls off a cliff. I don't really see their offense being able to generate anything against an elite Volunteers defense. And I mean, even last game against, who was that again? Oh, they played Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship. Like he basically benched his entire starting group for the entire second half. Like Tyler Bilodeau played like 14 minutes. So like, you don't even know who you're getting on the floor half the time. And I think that just creates, you can't really gain like any continuity on the offensive end. And you make one mistake for Mick Cronin, and you're getting tossed on the bench for 5 minutes, and then you can get thrown back in there when somebody else makes a mistake. It's just, you can't create any continuity. And I hate the offense in general. So I don't think it's a team that has much upside to take down a team like Tennessee. So at plus 113, I like both quadrants there for both teams. So I'll take that number.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's a great value parlay. I mean, to get plus money on that, where Arizona's playing good basketball and they're in a favorable quadrant. And then Tennessee, same thing. They, I think to the general public anyway, them making the SEC championship was kind of a surprise. They're playing good basketball right now, and they have a favorable quadrant as well. So I think both those teams getting to the Sweet 16 is pretty much a lock. I don't want to go too crazy, but I feel pretty confident about that.
For sure. And then, I mean, obviously anything can happen in the tournament, but it's two paths that I like a decent amount. Then another one is what we talked about, Maryland. I like them to get to the Final Four. I had that written down at plus 750, or I believe you can get at 800 in some spots. It's just, I think they can play up against pretty much anyone. I just prefer, it's a little bit safer, I think, to take the Final Four bet. So that's kind of just where I would go there. I'm not going to dive into anything else on that. And one final one is Kansas at plus 210 to make the Sweet 16. It's just, I kind of like their path, honestly, as talked about. St. John's, they're a vulnerable 2 seed, and I think Kansas matches up pretty well against them in that second round matchup. Like they can keep St. John's away from the rim. They're really good on the defensive glass, and St. John's really creates most of their offensive value on the glass. Like I think Zuby Ejiofor can kind of get neutralized there by Dickinson, KJ Adams, and Flory Badunga when he's off the bench. I just don't think they've seen any true size like this in the Big East. Like obviously you've seen Kalkbrenner, but there's not much athleticism or size next to him. So everyone else was able to get on the offensive glass in those games, but Kansas has arguably the same amount of size in the front court and on the wings. So I I really do think they can go to the Sweet 16. I have picked them to go to the Sweet 16 in a couple of my brackets. So, and I do think they match up well against Arkansas as well. Like they can defend them in transition, and Arkansas's offense grades out much worse in the half court, even though they're getting Boogie Flan back. We don't really know what we're getting there, but their half court offense has been pretty terrible all season long. So I know a lot of people are out on Kansas as a whole, but I still think they're a good team, and I think this is a good path for them too.
Yeah, I definitely like the path, and right, baiting St. John's I think is something we've been talking about for a long time, and I guess they just haven't run into the right opponent yet. I think Kansas can create some issues for them. Their veteran leadership, their elite coaching. Not to say that Pitino's not an elite coach too, but Bill Self just always seems to get his team playing right at the end of the season, regardless of what kind of team they have. So I think to get them at odds over plus 200 to make the Sweet 16 seems like kind of stealing for a team that was the number one team in the country in the preseason.
Yeah, and obviously they aren't really anything close to the number one team now, but like it's the same roster that was graded as the number one team in the entire country, and we kind of drank the Kool-Aid on that in the preseason. You can run the tape there, but
Yeah,
Hunter Dickinson's playing really well too, and I think if there's one place that you can get the St. John's defense, it's in the post-up game. Like they kind of prefer to switch everything, and that doesn't really work against post-up opportunities. And like they haven't seen a guy who's like as good as Dickinson in the post. Like Kalkbrenner's really good. He's not an elite post-up big by any means. He's good. It's just he doesn't really have many moves. It's more just like power moves and kind of getting on the offensive glass. But Dickinson can score in a multitude of ways in the post. So I do really like their matchup. I probably will bet them against the spread against St. John's if it gets there, but I will also be taking Kansas plus 210 to get to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, for sure. So that kind of wraps up our futures bets. If there are any others that we do happen to put out there, make sure you're in the Discord because that's where we're going to be posting all of those. But we really like the value on all of these that we gave out to you guys today. Should be a fun tournament as always, and hopefully we can all make some cash this March.